Good afternoon. Welcome to North Star Oasis. I'm your host, Jeff Williams. We're here for another action-packed episode. I want to start off today by reminding you, first of all, that we have all of our archives on YouTube, youtube.com/North Star Oasis. We've got a really interesting episode coming up today. There was a couple of things that happened earlier this week that we want to kind of shed the light and really give you some interesting information. But I think first we're going to go right over to our Prager University series on the Ten Commandments. Every week now for the last 6 weeks we have been putting together the video series to give you to understand why the Ten Commandments are so important in having an orderly society. And when we take a look at what's going on around this country, much less the world, and we see the impact that we've had once the Ten Commandments have been taken out of the courtrooms, taken out of the public spaces, what would happen if we actually lived according to the Ten Commandments? And that's really what this whole series is designed to do. And so in order to have a proper ordered society, something that is very integral to the U.S. Constitution, that it's important for us as Americans in the 21st century to go back to this document and understand how we can apply those lessons to us. And this isn't necessarily from a religious basis as much as it is from an understanding of the psychology behind what happens when we obey the Ten Commandments. So we're going to go to the video. Today is commandment number 5, thou shalt honor thy mother and thy father.
And your mother. This commandment is so important that it is one of the only commandments in the entire Bible that gives a reason for observing it, that your days may be long in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. Many people read that part of the fifth commandment as a reward. But while it may be regarded as a reward, the fact remains that it is a reason. If you build a society in which children honor their parents, your society will long survive. And the corollary is, a society in which children do not honor their parents is doomed to self-destruction. In our time, this connection between honoring parents and maintaining civilization is not widely recognized. On the contrary, many of the best educated parents do not believe that their children need to show them honor, since honoring implies an authority figure, and that is a status many modern parents reject. In addition, many parents seek to be loved, not honored, by their children. Yet neither the Ten Commandments nor the Bible elsewhere commands us to love our parents. This is particularly striking, given that the Bible commands us to love our neighbor, to love God, and to love the stranger. The Bible understands that there will always be individuals who, for whatever reason, do not love a parent. Therefore, it does not demand what may be psychologically or emotionally impossible, but it does demand that we show honor to our parents. And it makes this demand only with regard to parents. There is no one else who the Bible commands us to honor. So then, why is honoring parents so important? Why does the Ten Commandments believe that society could not survive if this commandment were widely violated? One reason is that we as children need it. Parents may want to be honored, and they should want to be, but children need to honor parents. A father and a mother who are not honored are essentially adult peers of their children. They are not parents. No generation knows better than ours the terrible consequences of growing up without a father. Fatherless boys are far more likely to grow up and commit violent crime, mistreat women, and act out against society in every other way. Girls who do not have a father to honor, and hopefully to love as well, are more likely to seek the wrong men and to be promiscuous at an early age. Second, Honoring parents is how nearly all of us come to recognize that there is a moral authority above us to whom we are morally accountable. And without this, we cannot create or maintain a moral society. Of course, for the Ten Commandments, the ultimate moral authority is God, who is therefore higher than even our parents. But it is very difficult to come to honor God without having had a parent, especially a father, to honor. Sigmund Freud, the father of psychiatry and an atheist, theorized that one's attitude towards one's father largely shaped one's attitude toward God. There's one more reason why honoring parents is fundamental to a good society. Honoring parents is the best antidote to totalitarianism. One of the first things totalitarian movements seek to do is to break the child-parent bond. A child's allegiance is shifted from parents to the state. Even in democratic societies, the larger the state becomes, the more it usurps the parental role. Finally, there are many ways to honor parents. The general rule is this: they get special treatment. Parents are unique, so they must be treated in a unique way. You don't talk to them in quite the same way you do anyone else. For example, you might use expletives when speaking to a friend, but you don't with a parent. You don't call them by their first name. And when you leave their home and make your own, you maintain contact with them. Having no contact with parents is the opposite of honoring them. And yes, we all recognize that some parents have behaved so cruelly, and I mean cruelly, not annoyingly, that one finds it morally impossible to honor them. There are such cases, but they are rare. And remember this: if your children see you honor your parents, no matter how difficult it may sometimes be, the chances are far greater that they will honor you. I'm Dennis Prager. Join Prager University.
And there you have it. There's reasons why we should honor our parents. And I kind of want to segue here for just a moment about, parents. Take a look at what happens, as Dennis Prager just mentioned. Take a look at what happens in the welfare state. And I'm not just talking about the inner cities. I'm not just talking about, the African Americans. I'm talking about the welfare state in general. That when parents become wards of the state through what was called in the 1930s, when the first bill to really provide welfare called, back then it was called relief. Originally, the original intent behind Social Security and welfare was to temporarily assist a mother in the rearing of her child. And that was the basis behind the 1935 Social Security Act. But what has happened now is we're seeing dependency, and we're also seeing a culture where fathers are not home. Marriage is punished. And I know many, many people who have children who grow up without fathers because their fathers are behind bars. And you go back to the fifth commandment, honor thy father and thy mother, and really I think that solves a lot of those problems. When we have a two-parent household, two people who are working to provide for a family, there's stability there. And that stability is a positive thing, especially on the youth. And when we don't have that in our culture, then we start seeing things like Ferguson. We start seeing things like the Black Lives Matter protest. We start seeing the lack of responsibility that people have in their own action. And those are the very things that we decry today. That how did this happen? Why are they like that? And really, that goes back to the fifth commandment. And maybe that's something we really need to go back to. But, and then also, I guess, Hollywood also does a lot of disparaging of parents and fathers. And that doesn't help matters either. And so we really do need to go back to that fifth commandment. And I think that would change a lot of things in our society for the better. But as I said, we have a busy episode coming up today, and we're going to take a look at get a glimpse of our presidential race going on right now, because there are only 41 more weeks until the next presidential inauguration. And in the polls, the delegate count, as we're over 50% of the way through, on the GOP side, 1,237 delegates are needed to become the nominee. 943 delegates are still available. Right now, Donald Trump leads 736 delegates. Ted Cruz has 463, and John Kasich has 143. This coming Tuesday, April 5th, is going to be, I think, one of the most momentous days in the entire campaign. This, for the Republicans, this is going to determine whether or not Donald Trump will get enough to get to 1237 or whether or not he will be stopped. Right now, it's a very, very close race in the polls. Ted Cruz has 36.5%, Donald Trump 32.7%, and John Kasich 21%. But if you take a look at the most recent polls, with the exception of a PPP poll, which has a statistical tie between Cruz and Trump, Cruz really has about a 10-point lead, according to Fox Business and Marquette polls from the last couple of days. And so the reason why it's so close is because you have an outlier poll, but I really do believe that this is probably going to be Ted Cruz's night. On the Democrat side, 2,383 delegates needed for nomination, 2,042 are still available. Hillary Clinton has 1,243 pledged delegates. She's gotten support from 469 superdelegates for a total of 1,712. And Bernie Sanders has 980 pledged delegates, 31 superdelegates for 1,011 total. Now remember, the superdelegates are not binding until the convention. So if you take a look at the fact that Hillary has 1,243 to Bernie Sanders 980 with 2,042 left in the race, that one is extremely close on the delegate count. So how do they stack up? And the GOP has 42 delegates at stake in Wisconsin on Tuesday. Democrats have 86 delegates at stake on Tuesday. And Bernie Sanders, 47.5% to Hillary Clinton's 45.3%. So hang on to your hats, folks. This one might be another razor-thin margin like we had in Iowa. That race is not over, and it is not going to be resolved anytime soon. So that is our update there. And then on this past Friday, there were a couple of surrogates who were in Hudson, Wisconsin on behalf of Ted Cruz at it was 10:30 a.m. on Friday. And that was Senator Mike Lee, Ted Cruz's wife Heidi, and former candidate Carly Fiorini. And North Star Oasis was there to give you the footage. So we're going to go right now to what our cameraman Dallas had taken. Here's the video.
Hello, Hudson. It's wonderful to be with you today. It's great to be here representing my friend Ted Cruz, the most conservative, the most reliable, and I believe the smartest member of the United States Senate. You know, when I decided to endorse Ted, I had a couple of things in mind. One is that he is my friend, and a couple of things that are important in a friend. You want somebody who always tells the truth, and you want somebody who's going to do what he says he's going to do. Well, Ted Cruz was elected by the people of Texas a few years ago to represent them in the United States Senate. He promised to do a few things. He promised to oppose Obamacare. He promised to resist any effort to undermine your Second Amendment rights or your religious freedom. And you know what? He showed up to Washington and he had the audacity to actually do those things, every single one of them. Ted speaks the truth. especially when it's difficult. And he does exactly what he says he's going to do. He's done that for the people of Texas. And now I'm hoping, and I'm looking forward to the day when he will do that for the entire country.
Ted being in the Senate has been a really unique experience. Ted has stood out for what he believes in. It's been a lonely place. It would have been a lonely place if it weren't for Mike Lee. That's right. And Mike has been a true friend. Whenever I go up to the Senate, I always get to go to Mike's hideaway. We get to walk down the back halls together, and it's always Ted and Mike. And so our girls know Mike is their daddy's best friend. So 3 quick things about Ted. When I met him 16 years ago, I knew that I'd met more than my match. I was raised in a conservative Christian family. My parents were Christian missionaries. My brother and I had a bread baking business growing up. Ted was raised in a similar household with a strong faith and a father who was a freedom fighter. Rafael Cruz knew the importance of elections and knows that what you're all doing here today is the difference of what protects us from the tyranny that can be government. And it's critical that we know how quickly things can change, how quickly we can lose our freedoms and liberties. Ted was raised on the Bible and the Constitution. His mom was the first in her family to ever go to college. This is a family who knows the ups and downs of small business, who knows the value of education, who knows the value of freedom. I loved how principled Ted was. He didn't learn what to believe to run for office. He's running for office because he knows what he believes. He's a man of great courage. He and Mike and Carly have stood out as courageous conservatives in this country because we know that government should work for us, not the other way around.
You can applaud that. You're going to send him out of here with a really big win. And the reason that's so important is, first of all, Wisconsin in this cycle is actually incredibly important as a state. It's not just that you come at the right time. I was on the Charlie Sykes show this morning, and I said to Charlie, I think the people of Wisconsin, conservatives and Republicans of Wisconsin, have earned a special credibility with other conservatives and Republicans around the nation because you have worked hard with your governor to enact reforms. You've stood up against a lot of opposition to actually get the right things done. And so people around the country know that you're informed and you're active and you stand for your principles. And so I think when Ted Cruz leaves here with a big victory, thanks to all of your help, that's going to send a really important message to the Republicans and the conservatives who have yet to vote. I want to tell you about how I got here, because I didn't expect to be here, honestly. You know, God always works in mysterious ways. But, you know, I ran for president because I understand in deeply personal terms, as we all do, how unique and exceptional this nation is. I have had the great privilege of living and working all over the world for many decades. I've done business work, charitable work, policy work. And I can tell you with absolute certainty that it is only in this nation that a young woman can start out the way I did, typing and filing and answering the phones for a 9-person real estate firm in the middle of a deep recession in the late 70s, go on one day to become the chief executive of what we turned into the largest technology company in the world, and run for the presidency of the United States. That is only possible in this great nation. And yet, we have come to a place in our nation where people don't believe that this is a land of possibility anymore. We have record numbers of men out of work. We have record numbers of women living in poverty. We have record numbers of young people who don't believe that the American dream exists for them. A country that has always represented freedom, suddenly people feel as though our freedoms and our liberties are under assault, whether that's our right to bear arms or our right to practice our religion, and that is true. And around the world, a nation that has always stood as a beacon of hope is no longer leading. Ted talks about the 3 issues in this election being jobs and freedom and security, and that is absolutely right. I ran for president because I thought it was important that we have a real conservative in the White House. Why? Because you see, it is a conservative who understands that it is too much power concentrated in the hands of too few that is the source of our problems now. We have too much economic power. We have too much political power concentrated in the hands of too few people in Washington, D.C. and in New York. And when all that power gets concentrated and has been concentrated by, let's be honest, both Republicans and Democrats, then suddenly our opportunities and our possibilities are taken away from us. Our liberties are taken away from us. I also ran because I thought it was so important that we have someone who will challenge the system, actually challenge the system, because the system isn't working anymore. Well, actually, the system works for a few of us. The system works for the big, the powerful, the wealthy, the well-connected, but it doesn't work for the small, or the powerless, or the unknown, and that's most of us, let's face it. When I suspended my campaign, a couple weeks later, we had a primary in the state of Virginia, which is where my husband and I live. And so I went into the voting booth, and I had a decision to make. My dear husband, who I've been with for 34 years, said on our way into the voting booth, "I'm voting for you, honey," you know. And I have to say, I saw my name on the ballot, and I was tempted. It was a thrill, to see your name on a presidential ballot. And then I thought, no, there's too much at stake. And I checked the box for Ted Cruz. Because I know he's a conservative, and I know he will challenge the status quo. And I tell you that story because I want you to know this. I checked that box for Ted Cruz before I ever had a conversation with him about endorsing him. So this isn't about a deal. This is about what's right for this nation. Now, before I let you go and we take some pictures, I want to talk for a moment about Donald Trump. Because I know that you're going to talk to people on the phone who say they're Donald Trump voters. I know a lot of Donald Trump voters. Let me tell you something. The people who vote for Donald Trump imagine, I think, that he will challenge the system. They call him an outsider. Listen, folks, Donald Trump is the system. Donald Trump has taken advantage of the system his whole life. He and Hillary Clinton are actually two sides of the same coin. Not just because they both like single-payer healthcare systems, not just because they've held liberal beliefs. No, they're two sides of the same coin because Hillary Clinton has made her millions selling access and influence from the inside. And Donald Trump has made his billions buying people like Hillary Clinton off. He will not challenge the system. He is not in it for the little guy. He will protect the system, preserve the system, take advantage of the system as he has all his life, and he's in it for him, not for you. So when we're done here today, I need you to get back on the phones and talk to everyone you know, because you need to send Ted Cruz out of here with a big resounding victory so that people across this country say, you know, the people of Wisconsin are real activists, they're real conservatives, they're real Republicans. Ted Cruz must be the next president of the United States, and you, the people of Wisconsin, are going to get that going in a really big way. Thank you for everything you do. I know it's not easy. We're going to take your pictures and your phone calls. Make sure this lovely lady is the First Lady of the United States of America.
And that was on Friday as we had the three surrogates, Mike Lee, Heidi Cruz, and Carly Fiorini in Hudson, Wisconsin, to work with volunteers in making the Get Out the Vote phone calls. I have not heard of Donald Trump coming into this area. I have not heard of John Kasich coming into this area. We have not heard of Bernie or Hillary making any western Wisconsin swings yet. But if between now and Tuesday that they come to town, we're going to try to be there. We try to be even-handed with all the candidates on the coverage that we give. And when we found out that Cruz was in town, but we didn't hear about the others, we made sure we took advantage of the opportunity to make sure that you are a well-informed voter. Now on Wednesday, there was a very special event that was held, and that was a funeral for Chief Petty Officer Duff Gordon, United States Navy, and that was also in Hudson, Wisconsin. And he was aboard the USS Oklahoma at Pearl Harbor, and he was buried in an unknown grave for 74 years until last year, and his remains were recently identified, and then on Wednesday he came back to the Midwest for his final farewell. And I was honored to be part of that funeral. And so we're going to give you a tribute to Chief Petty Officer Duff Gordon at this time. So we're going to roll the film. We're going to let you see a little bit more about the significance of what happened with the Oklahoma before we actually get into the funeral. So let's take a look at that video right now.
In Pearl Harbor, these old mooring quays, now immortalized with the names of the noble battleships they once held, are scarred witnesses to stark heroism.
Okay, it looks like we are having some technical difficulty. We're trying to figure out exactly what is going on with that at this time. I will just have to say that I had taken the opportunity to go through his service record. When I found out that he was from Hudson, that's when I wanted to know more as a historian that I am. And from there, we had, So from there, I made sure that I had picked up his military service record from the National Archives. I had gone through it, and when trying to do something here at the same time. There we go. I picked up his service record from the National Archives. I had gone through it, and then when I got to the service, there was a Air Force chaplain who had officiated, and before the service began, he said, "We're gonna start off with a prayer and a song, and then we're gonna go over to we're gonna bring it up to the Navy Admiral who was there and have him discuss some stuff about the process in remains recovery. And then after that, we're going to open it up for anybody to speak in whatever it is that if they have a story to tell about Chief Petty Officer Duff Gordon." Well, the problem is Chief Petty Officer Gordon would be 126 years old if he was still alive. And there was nobody in there that was old enough to be able to who actually knew who he was. And as a result, I was the only person there who really understood his full backstory. And I'm going to give you that in just a moment. I put together this video, but we were having some difficulty, and we're going to try to make it work again off of my computer. So please bear with me.
In Pearl Harbor, these old mooring quays, now immortalized with the names of the noble battleships they once held, are scarred witnesses to stark heroism. By following their grim line, we make out a row of watery graves, the white ghosts of United States warships that became funeral pyres and watery tombs. Many of the dead remain at the posts they manned on that deadly December 7th. The gallantry of Pearl's defenders centers its legend on the Arizona Memorial, the somber national monument arching across the stark remains of a great United States battleship and more than 1,000 of her sailors. To look into their memories is to look into their honor. The names memorialized here live in a place more durable than stone. They exist forever in the hearts of the nation to whom they gave all. Anyone who saw Honolulu in 1941 remembers a river of white uniforms flowing through its streets. The majestic battleships were floating cities within the city. The social life of Honolulu revolved around military dances, ships band competitions, and intership baseball games and boxing matches. Drink, laughter, tattoos, and very brief romances were everywhere. The heart of the United States Navy sat concentrated in moorings along Ford Island. There were 8 battleships, 8 cruisers, 30 destroyers, and many auxiliaries, 185 vessels. No military base of the United States gathered more war machinery, and it was one big sitting duck.
I knew where we were, but I didn't know that we were gotten into a war. We just tried to keep from getting hit by things flying through the air when the ship was turning over to port. And I didn't do a very good job because we had a guy named Woody Havens, was a heavyweight wrestler. He had all kinds of equipment down there, dumbbells and all that stuff, to train on. And one of his dumbbells, I don't know why, I could never make myself understand what the heck I was doing in the telephone booth. But I had just stepped out and one of his dumbbells came down and hit me in the leg. And they said, well, we'll get that fixed up.
Did it break your leg?
No, it didn't break it, but I had 13 bones in there that sprung loose or broke loose. We all talked very positively. They'd get to us some way. Mm-hmm. Lieutenant Commander Hobby was the ship's first lieutenant. Well, that's old English from the old Navy. And when a disaster happens on a ship, the first lieutenant takes over. The captain doesn't have a thing to say. And he kept talking to us. And when we got down where we could talk to him verbally, why, we got our spirits up and we thought, now he's going to really get us out of here. And by God, they did.
Both arms on the torpedo blister of the Maryland. And some kid up above threw me a monkey's fist. And I just reached up with my right hand and grabbed a hold of it. And by just snapping my arm like that, the monkey's fist just wrapped around my arm and I was securely fastened. So he pulled me up. And as he's pulling me up, I'm looking, and right here between my head and my hand, there's spots coming on the Maryland. Paint chipped off. What the hell are those? Oh my God, that's bullets. But if he'd have just lowered his angle of fire half a degree, that would have gone right through my head. It would have been all over. Well, it just tore the hell out of it because you knew that there was no way in hell those kids were going to get out of there. Oh, it still bugs the hell out of me. But, too many nights I lay there and think of that. What must be going through your head when you know that every breath you take is just shortening your own life? There's no chance of anybody ever getting to you. It was pitch black down there. Talking with kids that did get out, you know it was noisy down there. Kids were yelling, screaming, crying, praying. It must have been absolute hell. I just went down through the armored deck and got down on the same deck as our bunks were on. And I just put my right foot over the hatch. And as I did, I was carrying the torch in my right hand, and it just swept across the floor. And the deck was just literally covered with bones. Just bones, nothing else. No, you couldn't recognize anything.
When President Wilson went to Europe to urge the creation of the League of Nations, the Oklahoma was a part of the convoy. Jarrett described seeing Wilson during that voyage.
He had a high hat on, and he was like Harry Truman. He fought in the same war that we did, World War I. Everybody said he could never win, but he did, and it was one of the finest presidents we ever had.
The Oklahoma was not involved in any high-profile battles or duties. The hardest luck for the USS Oklahoma came on the morning of December 7, 1941, while she was moored on Battleship Row at Pearl Harbor. Jarrett by now had been out of the Navy for several years, but he still kept track of his old ship.
It took a while for me to sink in. I couldn't understand it because I understood the Japanese embassies came and was talking with the president at that time. And while the talk was going on, that's when they hit the ship.
The USS Oklahoma was hit by 7 torpedoes and capsized shortly thereafter. The ship lost 448 men, the second largest loss of life the Navy suffered in the attack. The USS Oklahoma proudly served the United States for 24 years and did so, as various crew members have pointed out, without ever having fired a shot in anger. The story of the USS Oklahoma is just a part of the military history of our state. The research library at the Oklahoma History Center holds extensive interviews with a number of crewmen who served aboard the Oklahoma, from those original commissioning crewmen in 1917 to the survivors of the attack at Pearl Harbor. All are available for you to read. The Oklahoma History Center is located just east of the state capitol on Northeast 23rd Street in Oklahoma City.
The number of Pearl Harbor survivors grows smaller every day. So does the number of USS Oklahoma survivors.
But one of those survivors came a long way for a ceremony here in Oklahoma City today, and he brought along an important memory of that day and that ship. New tonight, News 9's Gan Matthews has his story.
His step is slowing, his hearing fading, his memory going. But 89-year-old J.C. Penwell hasn't forgotten the USS Oklahoma and the attack on Pearl Harbor.
I saw a Japanese plane coming in a vertical dive over Ford Island in the middle of Pearl Harbor. And as it went into the straight down dive, I saw the Japanese red spot on the wings.
Seconds later, Penwell remembers explosions and fire all around. As the Oklahoma rolled over, he swam to another ship. In his pocket, he still had the key to the ship's clip room, where shells were loaded for firing. It's been his lucky charm ever since.
It got me through Guadalcanal and the Coral Sea Battle and the Midway battles. Not a wound at all of any kind.
But on this Pearl Harbor anniversary, J.C. Penwell, who lives at a veterans center near Springfield, Missouri, donated his clip room key to the Oklahoma Veterans Memorial.
Those memories are very sweet and very, very important to the folks. They're our heroes.
429 USS Oklahoma crew members perished in the attack on Pearl Harbor. His memory may have faded a little, but J.C. Penwell still recognized the names of some of his old friends and shipmates.
I have looked and I found 2 of them. There's a lot more.
A lot more. Over 2,000 Americans died that day. The one that forever lives in infamy. Gan Matthews, News 9.
A solemn ceremony at Punch Bowl is the first step in what could bring closure for families who lost loved ones on December 7th, 1941. Jai Cunningham was at this morning's ceremony for the dignified transfer of remains.
An honor guard made up of members from each military branch escorted the remains of men killed nearly 3/4 of a century ago while serving on board the USS Oklahoma.
The remains will go to our lab right here in Hawaii, and we'll go through some cleaning and some dental processing, and then the remains will go to our lab in Omaha for fuller accounting.
One by one, the honor guard took 5 caskets from the Punch Bowl grounds. Some of the graves are commingled, so it's not clear how many will be identified. Officials told me they're confident they'll be able to identify all the remains.
It's the families that are still suffering, so we're here to make sure that we honor their memory, and we also do everything that we can to ensure that the remains are handed back to the loved ones.
The area of Punch Bowl where the dignified transfer took place is called the unknown section, and you don't have to look far to find out why. 7 unknown from the USS Oklahoma, just feet away, another 7 unknowns from the USS Oklahoma. This dignified transfer, it starts the process of trying to identify all those service members on that ship killed on that day, December 7th, 1941.
We're on pace. I think we'll be done with the disinterments in October. And then, obviously, the work has already started, but the hard work will continue over the next couple years to do the full accounting of all 388 sailors and Marines.
It's a process that could take years, but will give many families a lifetime of peace. Jai Cunningham, KHON2 News.
In early November 2015, the last 4 caskets containing the remains of USS Oklahoma crew members were disinterred from the cemetery and given a dignified transfer to the Defense POW MIA Accounting Agency. Army Sergeant First Class John Mays was in charge of the disinterment team during the ceremony.
We are there to honor our fallen comrades that still haven't been ID'd, but we'll finally get to go home finally.
The remains were brought into the DPAA laboratory in Hawaii for analysis. Forensic anthropologist and lab manager Dr. Deb Zinni and her colleagues are now beginning to identify the last of the crew members.
This final disinterment at the National Memorial Cemetery of the Pacific earlier this month marks the first milestone in this identification process for the remains of those associated with the USS Oklahoma. Now that the disinterments are complete, we're going to continue with our identification process and reassociating remains and giving these individuals their name.
The remains will undergo an extensive identification process consisting of DNA, skeletal, and dental analysis. Although the task may be a challenge, Dr. Zinni says it's critical.
This mission is important because service members, past, present, and future, need to know that if they make the ultimate sacrifice, they will not be forgotten. This agency will use all of its resources to investigate, locate, and recover their remains and provide those answers to the nation and their family members.
More than 7 decades have passed since that tragic day in 1941, but Dr. Zinni and her team can now begin bringing closure to their families. 80% of the remains are estimated to be identified within 5 years. Army Sergeant Brad Parrish, Joint Base Pearl Harbor, Hickam, Hawaii.
A Wisconsin sailor is getting a proper burial nearly 75 years after his death. Joe Mason brings us a story of the long journey home to Hudson.
December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy.
It was so long ago and so far away. But now a Wisconsin sailor who made the ultimate sacrifice at Pearl Harbor is finally coming home to Hudson, an unknown no more.
It's kind of satisfying to know that he's got a place to rest, that he's named, that he's not just lost.
Photographs and memories of Chief Petty Officer Duff Gordon are hard to come by. He was one of 429 men aboard the USS Oklahoma killed in the attack. The military wasn't able to identify most on the ship and buried hundreds as unknowns in Hawaii.
A lot of boys from Hudson that were lost in World War II.
Nancy Hawkinson says recently the military was able to identify her cousin's remains through DNA testing.
He grew up in Hudson, that he was one of many children.
After serving in World War I, he was called back to the Navy in 1940 and stationed at Pearl Harbor. He lost his life at the age of 52.
There's a lot of men that have served and are still serving, and, you know, they make a great sacrifice.
This Wednesday, along the St. Croix where he was raised, on the streets where he walked, Gordon will be buried in Hudson's Willow River Cemetery with full military honors, alongside veterans of other wars.
I didn't know him, but I want to be there.
It will be a homecoming nearly 75 years in the making. Rest in peace, Chief Petty Officer Gordon. Your service, sacrifice, and name shall never be forgotten. The last survivor of the USS Oklahoma passed away in January at the age of 95. Duff Gordon had no children, and his wife died years ago. Gordon's funeral will take place on Wednesday afternoon at 1 o'clock, and it is open to the public.
And he has a relative who really cares and is making a difference now.
Really is.
Joe, thanks.
75 years in the making. A World War II veteran finally comes home today to Hudson, Wisconsin. KARE 11's Alan Costantini has more on the monumental day and what took so long.
The day which will live in infamy became almost a decade of invisibility for the family of a sailor killed in the December 7, 1941 attack on Pearl Harbor. Chief Petty Officer Duff Gordon was on the battleship Oklahoma when the Japanese launched their sneak attack. He was one of 429 sailors and Marines who died on the ship. After the Oklahoma's sinking, only 35 of the victims were identified. It took 7 decades of improved DNA testing to identify more, and one of those was Chief Duff Gordon. Today is Vietnam Veterans Day, the day when the last U.S. combat units came back from Vietnam in 1973. And today is the day Duff Gordon comes home to Minnesota and western Wisconsin.
So I think it's very important that we do honor those that we are able to identify, like Chief Duff Gordon here.
The Deputy Chief of the U.S. Naval Reserve, Rear Admiral Thomas Lucier, traveled from Washington, D.C. to pay honor to Duff Gordon 75 years after he lost his life at Pearl Harbor.
I think it's really nice because being in the military and being a veteran myself, this is the honorable thing to do, and we chose to bring him back to Hudson because where he grew up.
The Delta plane bearing Gordon's remains landed at Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport just after noon and was greeted with a water cannon salute. An honor guard of naval personnel and airport police saluted the returning veteran as his flag-draped coffin was placed on a hearse from O'Connell's family funeral home in Hudson to begin the procession to his hometown. The Patriot Guard from Minnesota and Wisconsin escorted the procession to Hudson and the funeral home. He'll be buried in the Hudson family plot. A final salute for one of the greatest generation. Alan Costantini, KARE 11 News.
And that was the story. I hope you got a lot out of that. So the USS Oklahoma was a tragedy in the fact that so many people were still alive and just trapped. And as you heard, one of the survivors had mentioned that there was nothing left but bones. Well, Chief Gordon's body ended up most likely becoming one of those that were just bones. And while while they had the funeral there, they had it open up to the general public to say things. I believe I was the only one there who actually had the complete story of his military career. And I was permitted to speak on his career for about 10 minutes. So I'm going to give you some highlights here as we look at a short video from his funeral. Well, I'm hoping we get it. There we go. So, Chief Duff Gordon was born November 28, 1889 in Hudson, Wisconsin. He was living in Glenwood, Minnesota when he enlisted in the Navy on April 28, 1914 at the Naval Recruiting Station in Minneapolis. He was 5 foot 10 inches, 163 pounds with blue eyes and brown hair. His occupation was a plumber and fitter, and his highest grade complete was 9th grade. During his 20-year career, he served on the USS Florida 1914 to 1916, the USS Montana from 1916 to 1918, the Naval Base Azores 1918 to 1919, USS Galatia and USS Newburgh in 1919, USS Savannah from 1919 to 1920, USS Murray 1920 to 1922, USS Canopus 1922 to 1924, USS Rigel 1924 to 1925, USS Reno 1926 to 1927, USS Blackhawk 1931 to 1934, and in 1934 he also went into the U.S. Navy Reserve, at which he had stayed until he was recalled to active duty on August 29, 1940. During his tenure on the USS Blackhawk, he served as a member of the engineers on the USS Nevada on a temporary duty assignment and helped the crew receive a Red E Efficiency Award for efficiency in engineering. And he had received the Victory Medal with Overseas Clasp in 1921 for service in World War I, and the Yangtze Service Medal for service in China in 1934. And then, of course, he had perished on the USS Oklahoma on December 7th, 1941. He was laid to rest on Wednesday, March 30th, 2016. at Willow River Cemetery in Hudson. So that was the life and career of Chief Petty Officer Duff Gordon. We've got one last thing we're going to show you, and that is one of the final survivors, except we got to find it here. One of the final survivors from the USS Oklahoma before he passed away. He wanted to conduct a band, and a couple of years ago he was allowed to conduct a high school band. And as we try to leave you with a musical number, we're going to leave you with this one. That's our show for today. We'll see you next week.